Thank you so much for making time to join us this afternoon. It's really wonderful to be able to gather together in person in what feels like a really, really long time. My name is Meredith Lehman, and I work in the education department here at the Kemper Art Museum. So very excited to have you all with us today. I want to first acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral lands of the Osage Nation, Missouri, Illini Confederacy, and many other tribes who are unjustly removed. We recognize these communities as we live, work, study, and benefit from this occupied land. We also want to take a moment to acknowledge the ongoing crisis in Afghanistan that is forcing the displacement of thousands of people, some of whom are resettling here in St. Louis, thanks to the efforts of the International Institute and partnering organizations. In conjunction with Hostile Train 94 and today's panel, we are hosting a donation drive to gather household items and hygiene products to support new members of our community. On your seats, or actually I think on a table in the back near the ice chest, you will find a list, a half-sheet flyer with a list of critical items and information about how to donate to the Kemper Art Museum, or not to us, but the donation drive at the Kemper Art Museum through September 17th, or directly to the International Institute. I'll also add that on that half sheet is a link to their website, and there's more information there about other ways to get involved, like volunteering, for example. So Hostile Terrain 94 is a global pop-up exhibition composed of thousands of handwritten toe tags that represent migrants who died crossing the US-Mexico border since the mid-1990s, and gives representation to this humanitarian crisis. Hostile Terrain is based on the research of the Undocumented Migration Project. It is being exhibited at locations across the United States and around the world. In St. Louis, Hostile Terrain 94 has been shown at the Danforth University Center here on campus, at St. Louis University, and now here at the Kemper Art Museum through September 5th. And so it's inside the lobby if you haven't had a chance to view it. Our panel today is led by local organizers of Hostile Terrain 94, who will discuss the impact of border policies and border crossing on local and global communities, as well as the experience of organizing this participatory exhibition in St. Louis during a global pandemic. I'm delighted to share that our program will begin with multidisciplinary artist Mee Jey's performance of My Baby that honors the unidentified people who lost their life in the desert of Arizona. After the panel discussion, we will have a Q&A, so if you have time, please stay for that. We also invite you to view the exhibition after the panel in the lobby. It'll be up again through Sunday if you don't have time today. We want to take a moment to thank the Global Studies Program, the American Culture Studies Program, the Department of Art History and Archaeology, the Department of Romance, Languages, and Literatures, all in Arts and Sciences, as well as the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement and Institutional Diversity. We also want to express gratitude to David Cervantes, Javier Torres Gomez, and Mickey Janover for their collaboration on the exhibition. I'd now like to introduce our speakers. So we'll go actually from your right to the left. Tabea Linhart is Professor of Spanish, Comparative Literature, and Global Studies at WashU. She is the author of Fearless Woman in the Mexican Revolution and the Spanish Civil War, co-author of Mapping Migration, Identity, and Space, and most recently completed Unexpected Routes, Refuge in Mexico, 1931 to 1945. She regularly teaches courses on global migration. Maddie Gottbrath is the coordinator of international programming for WashU's undergraduate global studies major. In her current role, she teaches first-year students in the Global Citizenship Program, which includes an immersive border awareness program in Tucson. She connects locally with individuals impacted by migration by volunteering with Casa de Salud, the International Institute, and other organizations. Isla Sharon is Associate Professor in the Department of Art History and Archaeology at WashU. She is the author of Portable Borders, Performance Art and Politics in the U.S. Frontera since 1984, as well as articles published in the Journal of Borderland Studies and Geohumanities. And those are just a few. As part of the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity, their Innovation Space initiative, she is launching a collaborative map of community art on the US-Mexico border in 2022, and you can find more details about that on our website. Mee Jey is a multidisciplinary artist whose work focuses on the collective politico-cultural identity and experiences, communal creativity and connections through immersive installations and performances, relational art projects, and time-based media. She is a recipient of the McDonnell International Scholarship and Legislative Fellowship. And I'll now share an introduction to her performance, My Baby, which incorporates toe tags documenting the information of individuals whose remains have been found since January 5th, 2020, when the materials for the Hostile Train 94 exhibition were first sent out. So we'll start with the performance, then afterwards the panelists will come back up and we'll have a conversation, and there will also again be time for some Q&A after. My Baby. Millions of people leave their homes and undertake arduous journeys in search of a better future. Thousands die or go missing, and as many bodies are found that remain unidentified. According to Hindu belief system, if a dead person is not given a due farewell, the soul wanders on the mortal world, suffering in pain. Assuming the role of a ghost mother, Mee Jey gives these lost souls a due remembrance by renaming them as My Baby and helping them to rest in peace in the other world.
My Baby, age unknown, voting date 12/1/20, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, voting date 13/1/20, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 4/26/17, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 1/3/17, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 7/30/18, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 8/8/18, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 3/9/11, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 7/11, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 7/28/13, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 7/31/14, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 7/31/15, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 11/6/14, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 11/1/20, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 7/20/11, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 6/28/16, cause of death undetermined. My Baby, age unknown, reporting date 4/23/40, cause of death undetermined. My baby, age unknown, reporting date 1/2/20, cause of death undetermined. My baby, age 46, reporting date 4/27/11, cause of death undetermined. My baby, age unknown, reporting date 1/4/20, cause of death undetermined. My baby, age unknown, reporting date 3/1/20, cause of death undetermined. My baby, age unknown, reporting date 5/1/20, cause of death undetermined. My baby, age unknown, reporting date 9/1/20, cause of death undetermined. My baby, age unknown, reporting date 9/1/20, cause of death undetermined.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yep, okay. Thank you, Mee Jey, for that powerful performance and for helping us sort of frame the discussion for Hostile Train 94. So I think a way for us to maybe begin this panel is for each of our speakers to just spend a few moments talking about a particular aspect of the exhibition and how it connects to their work. So we'll just go around and they'll each share for a little bit, and then we can have a conversation and open up the floor for questions as well. Okay. Do you want to start with you, Tabea? Maddie. Okay.
All right. So I'm Maddie Gabreth, and I'm going to share a little bit about how it plays into my role in the Global Studies program here. First off, Meredith touched a little bit on this, but the really cool thing about Hostile Terrain and a little bit more background is that it is a global pop-up exhibit, which means that it's not only here, but it's also at over 150 other host institutions around the world. And so that includes places in Brazil, Germany, South Africa, Australia. And all of this, like this huge global initiative is sponsored and organized by the Undocumented Migration Project, which is self-defined as a nonprofit research, art, education, media collective that was founded in 2009 by a professor at UCLA named Jason De Leon. And the goal of UMP was to specifically study and bring awareness to clandestine or illegal border crossings in the region of the Sonoran Desert between Mexico and Arizona, southern Arizona. And so in 2019, Jason De Leon actually came to WashU to give a speech for the Holocaust Memorial Lecture, which Tabea helped coordinate and organize. And so after she had met him and learned about his work, she reached out and started rounding up a collective of departments and programs here at WashU who would be willing to fund and bring hostile terrain to St. Louis. And so I immediately dove in because I care about this issue personally, but also because it fit really well within my role as the event coordinator for a global studies program here, formerly known as International and Area Studies. And then also in my role as an instructor for the Global Citizenship Program, which is a year-long first program for first years here at the university. And so actually before all of this, in March 2020, right as the pandemic was hitting the US, I took the group from that year to Tucson, Arizona for an immersive border awareness program. And for me, and I think a lot of the students that went with me, it was our first time seeing the border in person, physically. And so those experiences that we had, the people we met with, engaging in migrant justice work, the walk through the desert, the witnessing of deportations in the courtroom, those all had a really large impact on all of us and made us really want to come back and do work within our own region. But then obviously the pandemic happened and that kind of shook things up. And so it made it a little bit less clear what methods we could really take to take action on this issue. And honestly, a lot of the ways of taking action seemed a little bit hopeless. And so coming into the hybrid academic year of 2020, Hostile Terrain kind of paved that way to make the method seem a little bit less blurry and a little bit more hopeful for me in my work. And so it really offered an opportunity for me to connect the GCP students that year with a little bit of that tangibility that they would not get to have because they would not be going to Arizona and seeing everything in person. And outside of just GCP students, it offered that same kind of interaction and engagement that we were all longing for to other students, staff, faculty, people around St. Louis. And it wasn't just, staring at a computer screen, which is what we had been doing. So for me, experiential learning is really everything. Hearing and seeing and touching and feeling the border region is infinitely more impactful than just writing or reading or talking about it in a classroom. And so Hostile Terrain really offered and still offers that to those who are participating in it, whether you were people who wrote and pinned toe tags, or you might help us take down the exhibit next week if you're free and willing. And we do have some more toe tags to fill out. But yeah, this is all just kind of like a way that we can really dive into that experiential learning that's so important. And it took a lot of emails and several outdoor drop-offs to Tabea's porch and my office, and mailing tags and preparing virtual tags and all of this hybrid stuff. It took a lot of manual labor to build the exhibit, and we give a lot of thanks to the local architect David Cervantes, who helped us do that. But we got it done, and it was all done in community, which makes it even more powerful. It was not just one person who set their mind to it. It had to be many, many people setting their mind to it.
Thank you, Maddie. All right, so I will talk a little bit more about the kind of work that I do in my normal life and how this exhibit has really changed so much for me. I got to meet wonderful people, first of all, which is always great. So at any given moment in history and across the world, closing borders never stops people from moving from one nation to another, from one place to another. That has always happened, and that will continue to happen. Closing borders usually leads to more injury and more death and more suffering. HT94 is clearly about the Sonora Desert, about a very specific migrant trail, and about a very specific policy called prevention through deterrence. But we also see versions of this in different parts of the world. In the Mediterranean Sea, of course, if you look at the razor wire walls and the
Spanish enclaves in northern Morocco, and also in different moments in history. So my research is about the 30s and 40s, when people also had to leave their homes. And in that moment in time too, borders were reinforced, which meant that people had to cross through more dangerous terrain. So this always raises the question of what do we do with this massive loss of life? This goes back to Mee's performance, of course. How do we remember and how do we mourn for those who have lost their lives doing something that people have always done and will continue to do, which is migrating? I don't have a good answer for that, so I did what academics do. I went to somebody else, so I'm going to quote somebody else. The writer Maza Mengist, she wrote a brief essay called The Act of Naming in response to the death of Alan Kurdi on a Mediterranean beach. So these are her words, which are much more eloquent than mine. Those bodies that wash up on shore, however, often cannot be easily identified. They lack fingerprints and papers. They lack someone who can point to them and say, I know who she is, or he was a friend of mine. The language of grief gets twisted in the absence of a name. I'm going to repeat the sentence because I think it's very powerful. The language of grief gets twisted in the absence of a name. How can we grieve for those we cannot identify? They are dead, but to be afforded the rights and the respect of the dead, you must be someone. You must have a name to attach to a body that is no longer living. So those who still search for you can find you and then properly let you go. This is how we make a memory of those who have gone. We learn of the loss, we acknowledge the person taken, we grieve, and then move forward by filling the gap with remembrance. Yeah, these are not my words, they're somebody else's. But I think it's also, even though this is an essay about the Mediterranean, it also is so much about the exhibit. This exhibit is about names. It's also about so much more. It is very geographically specific, but it also speaks beyond its context. I think we've all experienced a before and after in 2020 in so many ways. And for me, the before and after also has to do with building this exhibit. You know, before that, I did what academics do, we write articles that nobody reads and read books and all of that. And then suddenly I was immersed in something very, very different. And this is what this exhibit meant for me. So I really go and see it if you haven't had a chance to.
Hi all, and I'd like to thank both Maddie and Tabea for those perspectives. I think that they've done both a wonderful job of framing this exhibition and this memorial for a wider audience of people who may not have gotten to participate in it initially, but are still moved and affected by the content therein. As an art historian, I think about this as an aesthetic object. I think about it as a memorial. My work has focused on multiple sites, but the U.S.-Mexico border being one of the most prominent in the course of my research. And I am shifting to think about the border as a landscape of necropolitics. So I don't know if you've heard that word before, but necropolitics is sort of the converse of biopolitics. It's a situation in which the state really has complete power over life and death. And we see that in places such as the camps, such as the detention centers, and I would argue the border as a whole, this entire landscape that hostile terrain maps, at least even just for the Sonoran Desert region. It puts it into stark visual terms. Each tag is a person. Each tag has a story. Each tag relates to an entire journey and a life cut short. Unlike traditional memorials, however, this is a participatory and multi-sited memorial, and it achieves, I think, its greatest resonance as something that really takes place in the bodies of those who participate in it. So it doesn't mean that if you didn't participate, you don't get to really experience the memorial, but there is something about the labor of putting this together. Not just of filling out the tags, which, my goodness, I had not written by hand in so long. So actually the labor of filling out the tags, it's uncomfortable, right? The act of pinning I pricked myself a lot. It was uncomfortable. It was something that my body remembers because I didn't just look at it, but I felt it. I breathed it. I was standing in the duck in a hot mask, pricking myself with pins. And in a sense, this translates the data, the information about these people who died crossing, trying to get to a better life, have more opportunity. It takes these people's life stories and it encodes them, it embeds them in the bodies of those who have participated and who witnessed this memorial. You don't come through it unchanged. And I found myself, even as an art historian who looks at challenging visual material all the time, I find myself crying as I was filling out the toe tags. I found myself identifying with these people, thinking of them as my baby, thinking of them as my friend or myself, right? We start to make those associations the more we know about somebody. So unlike traditional memorials where you do see a list of names, think the 9/11 Memorial or the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, which are extremely powerful. Here we get more hints of a story. We may not even get a name, but we start to get a hint of a narrative, and we start to get a sense of even just a tiny glimpse of who this person once was. And in that sense, HT94 upends our expectations of what a memorial is, because it's not a monument that's carved in stone that's meant to last forever. It's something that encodes itself into the bodies of those who witness it. And it becomes a living, breathing memorial that replicates itself from site to site, online because of the pandemic, and in person. And in that way, I think it really pushes our conceptions of what we can do to memorialize people, not only on the border, but again, just thinking of memorials more broadly. How can we commemorate and how can we witness? So with that, I will pass it back to Meredith.
This one's still on? Okay, great. I guess thank you all for taking some time to share a little bit about different aspects of this participatory exhibition. And I didn't know if Tabea and Maddie, if there's anything, Isla sort of touched on what you were saying earlier, Maddie, about the experiential learning aspect of this participatory and very collaborative project. If anyone wants to share a little bit more about the significance of this work as a participatory experience, particularly around the embodied act of filling out, writing toe tags, and then pinning them on a map as a way to recover the stories and the lives of those who've bravely faced the dangers of crossing the border. So I just want to open that up in case there's more to say about that.
Still on. Okay, still on. Yeah, so I think one thing that was great about this exhibit is that we had people kind of submit written reflections as well, or non-written reflections, but actually all of them were written, but we welcome non-written ones as well, and we put them up on our website. And so I actually ended up writing one on how the exhibit itself and participating in it, like the tangible experience of writing down someone's information onto this like tiny little tag, and then like cradling it in your hand and then pinning it into the exact location where that individual was found on this map. For me, it like that process actually forced me to realize the lives that I hold in my hands like every day. And so with hostile terrain, that's like you're holding kind of their memory, like sometimes their information, their name if it's known, a lot of times it's not known. But in real life, we hold people's lives in our hands in like a much deeper way, because everything that we do impacts those around us, and it's our responsibility to make sure that that impact is as positive as possible. And so I think for me, the exhibit really placed that like responsibility in a new light.
And maybe to add to that too, so if you've seen the exhibit, it's quite massive. So it's really evident that you need a community to build this exhibit from the very first day. So when we started reaching out to people who would be interested in filling out toe tags, to actually building it, and then to all of you being here. So I think all corners of the university were somehow involved in this exhibit. So we had, students, all of you, faculty, staff, and also members from the St. Louis community who were involved in this. We talk a lot about what is our place in this city, what is our role here, and this was in that strange academic year that was last year, one way in which we could also reach out and maybe start these somewhat long overdue conversations with the local community too. And again, as I said earlier, we got to meet really interesting people. The other thing, and this has to do with the fact that it was built into, that we installed it last year. As was mentioned earlier, hostile terrain was installed at a number of universities last year, at a number of universities in other places this year, and maybe even next year. And this was not planned, but we also got to know the hosts at other institutions. And Maddie and I had a number of conversations with students, faculty, and staff at other universities, other places, asking, hey, help us out with this problem. So this was kind of unintended, but it also makes me feel like we all became part of this unexpected community also.
Sort of with that in mind, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about what it means to have this work specifically in St. Louis, in the context of St. Louis, our locality, but also within Missouri. And so with that, sort of what work regarding these themes of migration and borders, will continue or maybe even be left undone in the region after Hostile Terrain 94 is taken down? I guess that's sort of a two-part question. Sort of thinking about the Hostile Terrain 94 specifically in our local context in Missouri, but also how the conversation and the action or the work will continue in this region after the work is taken down.
Sure. So there are a whole number of ways in which you can get involved, and there is information on our webpage also about local organizations and also that are not local too, long after this exhibit is taken down. With regards to the local relevance too, of course, in this city and in this region, we have many other kinds of borders. Some are visible and some are invisible too. And we also, and of course this came extremely present last year, all kinds of violence perpetrated on bodies. So this is something, even though this exhibit is about something that's miles and miles away from us, we also hear very similar stories with our own very problematic borders. And we talked about ways in which we could use this exhibit to think about the Delmar Divide. If you just moved here, you may not know what the Delmar Divide is, but you will learn, I'm sure of that. And the other point is, in this region, we do have a community of migrants, mainly from Central America, who have had very similar experiences to the ones shown on this exhibit too. And there are ways in which you could get involved and to support these communities also.
Yeah, I'll just touch on that. Yeah, the sense of St. Louis as a divided city, but also even the symbolic dividing line that is the Mississippi River, the arch, even thinking about the histories of those arch grounds, the people who were displaced, to make room for that monument to manifest destiny that we have, that is the icon of our city. So even thinking, of St. Louis as a particularly important site to have these conversations, not just as we are part of, this entire country and world, and we are global citizens, but as, a city that actually I think has a duty to have these conversations and to reckon with our own history.
Yeah, I think building on that, in the planning process, or really the implementation process of Hostile Terrain, we were trying to reach out to other local artists who could really touch on the themes of not just the border between nations, but also the borders in our city. And we were hoping to get some local artists that could contribute, but kind of ran out of time and capacity, and everything was jumbled. So I think that's one thing that never really came to fruition, but is really important to mention now and think about, especially because I think a large majority of you all are freshmen here. But just remembering that Hostile Terrain represents the U.S.-Mexico border, but it's also represents only one string and a much larger web of systemic violence and oppression. And so trying not to just focus on this one and really seeing the broader picture of how it all connects is really big.
we've sort of touched on this too in thinking about the context of this exhibition right now is thinking about the dual emergencies of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the humanitarian crisis at the border, and how has that reframed the project that you've been working on, both through its meaning, but also through the planning process and the programming that you've done around the exhibition.
So I guess I'll start by thinking about those dual emergencies. Because as it felt, I think, well, it didn't feel, it was the case in 2020, right, that the pandemic pushed everything almost to the side. We were talking about one massive problem that was, sort of, tsunamiing at us. That's not even a verb, but it was just washing over us, and it felt almost as if everything else needed to be put on hold. But of course, the pandemic didn't level the inequalities, right? The COVID spread in detention centers, right? And it spread among migrant camps and communities. I remember just seeing on PBS News, right, the concerns about even immigrants from the Mediterranean in those migrant camps in Europe. How were they going to social distance when you have tens of thousands of people crammed into makeshift improvised housing? So the migration crisis and the pandemic exacerbated, right? They exacerbated each other. And it wasn't something that could just be put aside to deal with the emergency of the pandemic. They were co-constitutive, and they were one and the same. And as for that kind of shift from the material to the virtual, I think we'll all talk about that. But there was a sense at first of sort of deflation, right? Because so much of this is about coming together as a community and sharing and having that embodied experience. And how do you do that when you can't be with other people? How do you do that when you have to be afraid of other people, especially in the early days of the pandemic when we didn't know enough about, or we didn't even have masks, right? Or we didn't have even the ability to come on campus. So it forced a lot of creative thinking and creative planning. But I think in a sense it enabled this to open up to people far beyond the St. Louis region, and it actually kind of mapped a different community.
Yeah, I think just building off of that, looking at the time and energy that I spent trying to reach out to various different communities versus time and energy spent if everything was on campus in person is drastically different. So it really allowed us to reach out to those new communities and be more throughout St. Louis than we would have otherwise, because all of our time would have probably been spent booking rooms on campus and getting flyers out to students, and it would have been much more student focused than it ended up being, kind of bringing students and making them see this much larger community that is St. Louis, that can relate to all of their studies and does relate to all of their studies, and is really important to get out and get to know.
And one more thing to add here is that when the exhibit was envisioned originally, it was supposed to have taken place at all the different host institutions before the November 2020 election. And then all of the texts were going to be sent to Washington, D.C. And of course, it never happened that way. It happened in a very different way. And I mean, I think ever since that original first box arrived in my office that contained the materials, the world has changed at least 3 times over. And I think we have kind of whiplash, from everything that keeps on happening and that we keep on hearing about. But it's interesting also how the exhibit kind of traveled with that too. As you mentioned earlier, it's temporary, it will be taken down. But I think the fact that we were able to set it up at this institution in this community is also now part of the university's history in a way.
Right, I think you spoke to that another time we were meeting, or talking about how it sort of becomes part of the university archive, in a sense, or the St. Louis Community Archive, even after the exhibition goes down. So will the toe tags be sent to Washington, D.C. eventually, or where will they go, or what will happen to them?
I think that's still a little bit in process, but we will definitely send a number of the toe tags back to Los Angeles and to the Undocumented Migration Project, but there are 3,000 in there, so no, not all of them. all of you, if you're interested, you can take toe tags home with you after we've taken the exhibit down. Feel free to send them to your local representatives, or send them, to Washington. You can do with them whatever you would like to do. Respectfully, I would add there. So something of that will still be done. The Undocumented Migration Project is also working on a more permanent exhibit, but we don't have enough information about that. Maybe do you not talk a little bit more about the next step?
Yeah, is that jumping ahead? Okay. Yeah, so we're going to actually have a closing event on the 17th of September. There are flyers on the table in the back. But we're hoping to just get students and whoever else, community members there, you can just take some of the tags if you want them for like a memento, or like to send to your representatives, or we'll have like craft materials to kind of take something that's pretty like morbid and kind of craft it into something that is beautiful, is the idea, and something that is like kind of a remembrance, like your own memorial. And then some of them will be sent back to UCLA, and then some of them, so a lot of it's in flux, but there is that opportunity if you're willing to help us kind of close out this time of hostile terrain at the university.
Just add one thing to that. So again, I'm an academic. I like archives and libraries and those things, right? So a number of these tags will be stored at the university archives in the library. So if you think about it, now all of you are part of the history of this institution. Some of you have just been here for maybe 2 weeks or so. Some of us have been here for a long time. But all of you are part of this history. And now, so are the people who lost their lives trying to cross the border, and so are the loved ones too. So if maybe 20, 30 years from now you come back, visit this institution, if you want to, you can see examples of these toe tags in our library, because we are all part of the same history now.
I do want to also make sure that we have some time to open up the floor to any questions from y'all in the audience. And Mee Jey, would you like to come back up here too? If there are any questions for Mee Jey about her performance art, I can already see some hands up. I'm gonna try to move around with the microphone, and I can hold it out for y'all. That way we're less passing with the microphone. Okay, great. Did you want to start? Okay.
Can I take it?
Okay. Let's start.
All right. No, thank you so much for this really amazing presentation. My question, you talked about the location of this exhibition in Missouri, the location of this exhibition in St. Louis. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the location of this exhibition in a campus art museum, in the University Art Museum. I have a lot of museum studies students here. They're first years. This is the first exhibition they're attending on campus. And one of the quotes they read was Theodor Adorno's quote about museums being mausoleums, sepulchers for works of art. And this is a really different version of that, making, the art museum a kind of necropolis, right? A living cemetery. And I'm wondering, what is the relationship between the mission of the Kemper Art Museum and this space, right, and this kind of exhibition?
Okay. Well, full disclosure, I'm not part of the Kemper. I'm part of the art history department. So I would love to hear the Kemper's thoughts on, like, if there was something really, I'm curious about the thought process behind choosing to accept this into the museum, if it was like an automatic sort of thing, or if there was a lot of discussion. But thinking more broadly about the role of museums, particularly campus museums, right? It's a teaching institution. It's a teaching museum. So it has a duty to the campus as well as the general public, right? To educate, to support the various classes and initiatives at WashU. And so even though this is not necessarily the kind of typical object you would see in the Kemper, and like there's some fabulous exhibitions upcoming, and you're going to see things that sort of register much more clearly as art. But I would argue that this really, it gives us a sense of an entirely different dimension of art making, this sort of social, participatory, engaged art that we don't frequently see even in museum, even in campus museum exhibitions. So I think it's a really it's an important moment to kind of show the Kemper's sort of outward focus and its sort of engagement with society, with the campus community, and with these larger geopolitical questions, and how all that can be integrated in something that is still aesthetic, that is still visual, and that still maintains a presence as art, but in this sort of nebulous region of art and participation and socially engaged aesthetics. But as I said, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Kemper, so I cannot, I'm not speaking for their thought process behind it. But
I mean, I can maybe speak a little bit to that in terms of the response. I mean, I think there was an enthusiastic response on the part of the museum to show this work, to show this exhibition, and to really be thinking about what it means to have this exhibition in the art museum on a university campus that is in the St. Louis community. So those different layers or sort of networks, and sort of going back to what Isla was saying about the participatory nature, I think that's really important as a teaching museum or a university museum to be sort of thinking about ways to build participatory experiences for visitors that sort of upend maybe the expectations we might have of coming to a museum and being sort of like a passive observer that comes, looks at works of art, moves on to the next one, but to really engage with them and to see yourself as participating in the conversation, and that encounter between the visitor and a work of art also then becomes part of the museum experience, part of the museum archive, in the same way this program, this conversation today is. And then also with that not seeing sort of objects, works of art objects is like frozen in the past, but also that really sort of investigating or interrogating the relevance to us today as observers, as engaged citizens, and bringing in works of art or exhibitions like Hostile Train 94 that are very much engaged with the current context, right, and social issues, to really open up those spaces for dialogue in ways that I think art is really primed to do so. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is like two questions, but they're pretty related. So I was just wondering what type of responses you guys got from this exhibit, and also like if you guys have actually seen a positive increase in like help or like offered help for this cause.
I'll just start with the responses. I actually had I did a virtual event with the Latinx fraternity here on campus, Alpha Psi Lambda. I always get them mixed up. And so they virtually filled out tags together and then also participated in the virtual reality experience that UMP designed, that you guys can scan on the exhibit. There's like a QR code to see it. And that was really powerful and sobering for me because I was hearing these students realize that some of their relatives had made this same path into our country. And so the exhibit and the virtual reality experience allowed them to really vividly imagine their family members and friends crossing that hostile terrain. And I think that was probably one of the most impactful, reactions that I saw from students.
Along those lines too, I think one of the reactions we got is that everybody thought it was very meaningful in unexpected ways. And going to back what Isla was saying earlier too, people were very moved by participating, and this moved to tears oftentimes. I remember having conversations with a few of our volunteers saying, I need a break. No? Oh, no, never mind, sorry. Wrong. So it was a very meaningful experience also because we were so isolated last year. So it's one of the few things we could actually do and do together. Even when it was through a Zoom meeting, it still kind of worked. But to answer your second question, I wish. I don't know. I certainly have no data to see how, if anything, has changed or whether it's going to change. Unfortunately, the news lately have not been very promising. But I can just tell you again a little story. So going back to the nature of this exhibit, how massive it is, it brings up a very different awareness of the problem than just, for example, reading the data, seeing the statistics. Over the summer, I was visiting Lewis and Clark College with my daughter, and I did not remember this, but hostile terrain was there. And so we walked through a building, and it was a library actually, and I said, oh, this is familiar. The student giving us the tour did not really know what it was, but there was another family with us also visiting the same college, and I remember them reacting, oh, I did not know about this. This seems to be something completely new. I've never seen that family again. I do not know whether they will become activists or vote differently, but it gave me some hope, at least a little tiny bit of hope. Any other questions?
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask, what are some ways in which, we can contribute or, be participants of these causes?
I was hoping you'd ask that before everybody left, because I realized that we hadn't. Well, we said that there's a closing event on the 17th, and there are flyers in the back, and that'll be kind of like taking tags and crafting. But we're also encourage people to sign up to help us take down the exhibit next Wednesday, at 9:30 a.m. here. There are QR codes on the back seats there that you can scan and do it's a sign up genius. They're 30-minute increments. You can come for as long as you want or as short as you want. Take down a couple tags. There are again 3,000 of them that we need to take down that day, and that's also in and of itself an experience. And then if you do want to fill out tags, we actually got sent the information of 300, a little over 300 more individuals who were found from January 2020 to I think August of this year. And so those are people who were not included in this exhibit because everything was shipped out at that point. And so we do have more tags if you would like to fill that out. Am I missing anything? So those three things.
Yep.
First off, I just want to say thank you. This is beautiful. Out of curiosity, how many specifically individuals are on the exhibit, and since when have their bodies been found?
The tags are 3,200, right? And
205.
3,205. Yeah. And the starting date, do you remember that? I want to say it's the 90s?
Yeah, 1990s.
Yes, it's the 90s. But if you go to the webpage, oh God, now I can't think of the name. It's linked through the Untitled Migration Project. It's Human Borders, thank you. So they have that there you can find interactive maps that go all the way back to the 80s actually. And there's an important reason why the number of deaths increased in the 90s, but the data is available even for earlier years.
Thank you.
So we need about an hour to discuss this, but no, in 1 minute or less, it's a policy called Prevention Through Deterrence, which is fortifying the borders in the cities so that people are pushed into more hostile terrain, hence the title of the exhibit. And so what ends up happening is that people die not because any particular government agent is doing harm to them, nature is doing that job. but there is, you can take a look at Jason DeLeon's book, The Land of Open Graves, or if you rather listen to podcasts, I recommend listening to the Border Trilogy put together by Radiolab. 3 episodes, it explains it really well. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. This is an explicit program by the U.S. government. This isn't something that we've inferred or people inferred over time. There was the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, which really sort of set the militarization of the border into play, and then all of these smaller initiatives, which had these insanely militaristic names like Operation Gatekeeper and Operation Hold the Line, and these were implemented at different sites along the border. And so that was from San Diego all the way. Right. And so it reinforced the border not just in terms of like the fence or the big beautiful wall that we all know and hate, but just thinking of all the layers of surveillance. There's ground sensors, drone surveillance passing overhead. It's an extremely patrolled set of land, even when there is not a physical barrier in place. To the point also where if aid groups try to put water stations in the desert so that people who are crossing can drink water, the Border Patrol will stake those out and basically use that as a way to trap people who are crossing. So now migrants avoid the water stations. So hence the terrain gets even more hostile due to the explicit, the explicit parameters of the U.S. government. And that is not unique to our previous president or the one before that, or this is an ongoing and cyclical political issue that is ongoing. That was my soapbox.
We appreciate it. Anyone else?
Prevention through that policy is so dehumanizing, and all of the ones that are caught up in that web. And so I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about the role of narrative in humanizing these migrants, and sort of as a counter to the dehumanization that takes place or that these policies assume.
Well, one thing that this exhibit does, I think, quite well is it does kind of encourage us to form those narratives, even when the pieces of information are really spotty. And if you look at the toe tags, if you have a chance to examine them, you get a sense of location, you kind of get a sense of what happened to these people maybe in their final hours. But, you really have to do the work to create that narrative. And in doing so, again, I think that is a more powerful experience because it's participatory, because it's not just a narrative that's being told to you, but it's one that you have to imagine for yourself. And so in that sense, I find this to be a particularly effective work in terms of humanizing. And I always worry about that terminology of humanizing versus dehumanizing, because of course they are human beings, and they is that mine? No. Okay. So yeah, but absolutely. I mean, I think that the dominant rhetoric by those who want the border closed really kind of uses the language of just a lot of animal language, a lot of, again, just words that are not used to talk about human beings. So absolutely, just the act of naming, or the act of claiming in the case of Mee Jey and my baby, right? It's a way to kind of insist on that humanity that was always already there.
Actually, could I, sort of going off of that question, I wonder, Mee Jey, could you talk a little bit about the role of narrative in your work, and the role of repetition and in your performance, writing and repetition, and how that connects to My Baby or other projects that you're working on too?
When I came to know about this project and when I started reading the names, it was normal for me to read, okay, this person's name is this, age and reporting date and all those things. I may not know the birth date, but I knew the day their body was found. However, when you come across these unidentified people and the name goes as unidentified, it almost slips off like the person doesn't exist just because we don't have a name. And it goes back to the same act of naming a child the moment it is born. So you have taken the identity away from a person who existed, and who existed not just for himself or herself, but for the whole family, the community, society, and all those things. That makes us more human, or I mean, that makes us like person itself. So this My Baby was actually designed, it was performed, this performance was originating from this whole idea of what if I die in a country where I have no family, and my parents would not even get to know that I'm dead. Then will I cease to exist? Will I be nobody? Will everything before me that came, or before the things that I carry, will be all nullified? No. And at that moment triggered in the mother that I am, and I decided that I will claim these as my own, so I will give them the final resting place ritualistically through this performance. And I think this is one human act that I could do as a person for another person who was there. I like to I like repetition in my work because these are small gestures. Currently, I am doing another piece where I'm creating a 21 by 12 feet fabric drawing of Elan Kurdi. You may not know the name Elan Kurdi, but you know the child, the Syrian child who was washed to the shore. And in this fabric drawing, people are tying knots. Like these small fabrics, they are just tying small knots in the chicken mesh wire. It is again a tiny gesture, but repetitively when you do it, it amplifies the meaning and intention of the work. And for me, the meaning and intention of any gesture is far more important than the final outcome. The outcome stays with the people. It is very, very difficult to quantify what I do, but I know the community I am connecting with will stay connected to my idea. It might forget about me, but they'll stay connected to the idea, the artwork. And that is what I'm leaving behind when I'll be gone from this world.
Thank you for sharing your words with us, Mee Jey, and your art with us. Maybe that's a good place to end and to sit with what you've left us with, Mee Jey. Did you want to add one more thing? Okay.
You can actually go and see this work on the flood wall next to the arch. It will be installed tomorrow, and you can go and see it. I mean, you can go and see the process tomorrow anytime after 9 o'clock, but on Saturday for sure it will be up for viewing, and you can go and see. Over 50, I'm saying less, over 100 people came together to create that. Of course, my sweat, labor, sleepless nights, my heart, everything went into it. But you can see how much people connected, and they helped me create this whole thing. Create one picture that changed the way we look at the immigration issue, the way we look at the future, the children who are the first and the last victim of violence of all kinds. So if you have time, go to the flood wall.
For those freshmen, it's very easily accessible via metro. So what better way to start exploring St. Louis than hop on the metro there, go downtown, and then hop up at the arch.
And it's part of one of the biggest expos of street art in the world that happens in St. Louis every Labor weekend. Came to us, so there's more art.
There you go.
Okay, well, with that, thank you to our speakers, our artists, and thank you to you all for your time and attention. And if you have time to check out the work, if you haven't, please feel free to do so. Thank you.